Do it. Where's her? Oh, you
Vet
got an animal.
drink with her.
Do they bite? No. What if they don't bite, they can come back. Are we locked in?
She does know how to use doors. I promise that she knows how to use doors. All right, good morning, everyone. After that's every day. We are in part 12 of our church history series. And so I see some new faces. And so for the last couple of weeks, we've gone through the last 1,000 years of church history. From end of Jesus all the way up into last week we talked about Gregory the Great. This week we're talking about the Crusades. So I'll summarize the last 1,000 years and we'll go through that for... I won't do that. I won't go through the last 1,000 years or so. But this week we're talking about the Crusades. One who crusades is called a crusader. The definition of speed limit is the limit of one's speed. Now we can do that over and over again, and you go through the definitions and use that word in the definition. And I think we've done that to Crusades. And often now, my sister went to college in Columbus, or I guess technically Bexley. The school down there is called Capital University. And they were once the Crusaders. But unfortunately, that name has kind of gotten a negative connotation to it. And now they're the Capital Commons. Not nearly as intimidating as a Crusader would be, I don't think. So I'm not here to condone the actions of the Crusaders. I'm not here to condone what had happened. I'm not here to say that it was good. I'm not here to say that it was bad. I'm here to say that it simply happened. And it happened as a result of Christianity. Now, if we look at the term crusade, it is simply following the cross. A crusader is one who follows the cross. A crusader is not simply one who crusades. That'd be far too easy. Speaking of far too easy, this verse that I have chosen this morning to describe the Crusades, and actually it is the verse used most often when depicting what the Crusades were all about, is one of the hardest verses that we will probably cover. And so, to begin this morning, I'm going to pull this verse completely out of context, just as the early Crusaders would have pulled this completely out of context. Don't worry, I'll put it back into context, just we have to get through this part first. To see why the Crusades took place, we will first look at... We'll first look at Matthew chapter 10, verses 32 through 39. Everyone who acknowledges me publicly here on earth, I will also acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But everyone who denies me here on earth, I will also deny before my Father in heaven. Don't imagine that I came to bring peace to the earth. I came not to bring peace, but a sword. I've come to set man against his father, a daughter against his mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. Your enemies will be right in your own household. If you love your father or mother more than you love me, you are not worthy of being mine. Or if you love your son or daughter more than me, you are not worthy of being mine. If you refuse to take up your cross and follow me, you are not worthy of being mine. If you cling to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for me, you will find it. Hopefully, as you read this, hopefully as you listen to me reading this, that sits uncomfortably with you. It should sit uncomfortably with you. Reading it out loud, I feel uncomfortable saying some of these words. But this is where we are at right now. This is the beginning of the Crusades. If we look here, let's look back at verse 35. I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. Now, some of you may be looking at this and saying this is why your relationship with your mother-in-law isn't that great. This is not biblical reasoning for that. So I'm sorry. Don't imagine that I came to bring peace to earth. Wait, what? Why is Jesus saying this? I came to bring a sword. If you lose your life, you will find it. What does all of this mean? Well, this is the reasoning and the justification for what happened over the next 200 years. Roughly, we'll cover from 1099 AD up until about 1291 AD. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about the causes of the Crusades. The causes of the Crusades. What brought about the Crusades? Why? What happened? I mean, why do a bunch of European Christians then go to the Middle East who they've never been there before? They had no claim to the land. They didn't even have any family there. And so why go back to Jerusalem and try to conquer a people that they had never even encountered before? We'll talk about that. Accomplishments of the Crusades. Accomplishments or lack thereof. I'm not sure what to label that. But what came about from these Crusades and what happens to even today? Do we see lasting impacts that reach into today? And hopefully we'll see some of that. I mean, I mentioned a little bit of one a little earlier. So causes of the Crusades. The holy sites and churches were established by Helena. Now, we have to go back about 329 AD to when Helena, who was the mother of Constantine, remember Constantine who united the Roman Empire and then moved the capital to Constantinople. This is that same Constantine. Roughly in the 4th century, Constantine's mother Helena traveled to the Holy Land. She is actually the reasoning why we have the holy site of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. She's also the reason why we have a church built on what was supposedly the nativity scene. Also during this, she traveled the entire area and found relics from the early Christian church. She's attributed to finding parts of Jesus' tunic, to finding nails from the crucifixion, to finding certain bones from other various apostles. It's actually interesting, the nails that were supposedly found by Helena, one was then emblazoned into Constantine's helmet that he wore during war times. And then the other one was actually fashioned to the bridle of his horse that he rode into battle. Just a little side fact, nothing really too important there. Pilgrimages to the Holy Land. So we have the fact that these places became holy to the Christian people. Now we have to realize that, well, the headquarters of the church went from Antioch to Rome, and now from Rome to Constantinople. And so there's all this changing, but yet Helena went back to the root of it all and really kind of depicted Jerusalem as the holiest of holy places. Pilgrimages to the Holy Lands. Now, we can all think of, going to the Holy Land. We often think of pilgrimages of going someplace that is higher than any other place we've ever been. Now, this isn't a new concept for many of us. Many of us like the idea of being able to take a trip to Jerusalem, to see the Holy Land, to go back to the place where it all started. We all dream of that. At least I think most of us dream of being able to do that one day. And so these pilgrimages actually started about this time, roughly between 400 to 600 and further on. These pilgrimages from Europe into the Middle East really started taking off. Now, much like today, in order to travel, you need money. It's not cheap to travel, especially now with prices going up all over the place. It's not easy to get from, say, Rome all the way to the Middle East. We talked the other week about Roman soldiers roughly traveling between 20 and 30 miles in a day. Now, those were soldiers who were forced to march 8 hours a day. Now, for a simple person who was walking that far, they probably covered a lot less land. They probably covered a lot less territory than these professional soldiers did. So it probably would have taken a couple months for this to happen. And so the very first people who were taking these pilgrimages were people who had money, people who were well off, people who had the means to take this trip, who could afford to take a couple months off of work and do this. And so these first pilgrimages were the wealthy. And once they came back, they were pretty well renowned for their travels. They went to the Holy Land, so they must be even holier now. You can kind of see where this legalism kind of take off here soon. Also, these Crusades were also seen as a means of salvation, a means of obligation, a means of fame, a means of political but also economic wealth. Now, what do I mean by all of this? Well, I said earlier that the people who went to the Holy Land were considered, even more holy. And so the people who originally joined these crusades thought, hey, if I join these crusades, then if I enter into the Holy Land, if I fight on behalf of God's army, then maybe I'll become holy. Maybe I'll receive my righteousness. Maybe my salvation will then come from these crusades. It was actually Pope Urban II who declared that dying in the name of God, you would receive your salvation. You could be saved by dying in the name of God. That should sound familiar if you know anything about Muslim extremists or Islamic jihad. This framing work should sound fairly similar. Observation, a lot of the people who went on these crusades had to go on the crusades. Basically, we get into that whole feudalism idea that we talked about last week, that if you were under a lord who had money and didn't want to fight, he would send you instead. Obligation. Fame. A lot of the people went. A lot of these later crusaders, not so much the first ones, but these later crusaders were knights. They were professional fighters. Much like we see boxers in MMA today, the more they fight, the more famous they become. The more they fight, the more they're able to win money. Now, there was no money that they got paid other than being a regular knight, but it was the money that they could steal, the fame that they could steal. Political and economic wealth. Well, political wealth, because all of this is political. If you're in control of a certain land and you have a number of knights underneath of you, well, if your knights then become more famous, then by connection, you also become more famous. And more fame creates more power. More power means you have more land. More land means you have more political and economic wealth. All of this kind of ties in together. So here we'll jump into a little bit of the Crusades. Like I said, there's about 200 years of these Crusades. Of these Crusades, I mean the church in Rome commissioning basically this war into the Middle East. Now, if we look at this time period, these weren't the only Crusades. There was also Crusades into Spain, fighting Islamic people in Spain. But there was also Crusades into the northeastern parts of Europe, up into Norway and Finland and the Scandinavian regions. So 8 Crusades between 1096 and 1291, first initiated by Pope Urban II. Now, if we look at Pope Urban II, we have to look about 20 years before this, when the original ideas of reclaiming the Holy Land first started. Reclaiming the Holy Land didn't start with Pope Urban II, but it was one sermon that took off and really ignited the fervor. In about 1091 was the first time Pope Urban II really started approaching this topic, and then in 1095, his sermon kind of ignited the whole powder keg and began the Crusades. Now, on a given Sunday, a preacher or a minister can hope that someone takes something from his sermon. Well, Pope Urban II incited a whole 200-year war. So you can see he must have done something fairly important that day. But here we have those starting. The Kingdom of Jerusalem by Godfrey of Bouillon, which would later become Advocatus Sancti Sepulchri, which is just a fancy Latin word for defender of the Holy Sepulchre, which is also another fancy term for the birthplace or the death and resurrection of Jesus. This is where that church is in Jerusalem. So during this first crusade wasn't the crusade that most of us think of. The crusade that most of us can think of, the crusades kind of paint this picture of what the Middle Ages were, of what knights were. Actually, the Crusades are where we get the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar were actually first commissioned as knights to protect the pilgrims on the way to the Holy Land. And so that's where we get the Knights Templar, and then later it spins into a whole bunch of different conspiracy theories, and we can thank Dan Brown for that. But here we have the first Crusades were mainly common people who heard Pope Urban II's words and were inspired to do something about it. They wanted to make a change. And so many of them didn't have money to buy armor. They didn't have swords or any other weapons to take with them. Most of them had sticks that they'd sharpen into spears. Maybe some of them were rich enough to afford a pitchfork that they would take with them to try to fend off the Holy Land, to take back the Holy Land from the Muslim people. Now, if we look at this period of 1096 being the First Crusade, we have to look back about 600 years, or about 400 years, to the middle 600s. Well, in the middle 600s, the Muslim people kind of came into Jerusalem and overthrew the people in Jerusalem. And so the people in Jerusalem were outthrown by the Muslim people. And so now in 1096, you have, well, these outside European forces coming in and kind of doing the same thing to them. And so if we're going to talk about the Christian aspect of the Crusades, we also have to first talk about the Muslim aspects of the Crusades. Nobody's hands are clean in this circumstance, if you will. Everybody has a little bit of dirt under their fingernails when it comes to the Crusades. It's not just one party against the other. Now, I mentioned the kingdom of Jerusalem. The kingdom of Jerusalem, well, that sounds like a monarchy. That kind of sounds like the return of the kings in 1 Samuel that we talked about on Sunday. Now, it's interesting here that Godfrey of Bouillon became the first king. I put the king in quotations because he rejected the title of king. He said no one in Jerusalem should be king except for Jesus. Now, Godfrey's heart was in the right place, but the rest of the people's heart really wasn't in the same place. And so he actually became the Baron of Jerusalem, or this fancy title of Defender of the Holy Sepulchre. Now, let me put up a picture here. This is the Middle East in 1135. The Middle East in 1135. This is actually Israel. And so this should give us a pretty good picture of what we're looking at here in the kingdom of Jerusalem being in this red line. Here should look like Israel today. This is what we know as Israel today. But this is the kingdom established by the Crusades. And so the Crusades really gives us our first picture of what present Israel would become. Now, up here we actually have the county of Edessa. The kingdom was separated into 4 parts. As we learn, having a kingdom or having an empire, it becomes hard to control if there's too much land and not enough power dispersed between that. And so these counties were established, and there's leaders of each of these counties. And then we have down here in Jerusalem, this is where the Baron Godfrey would have created his kind of kingdom, even though there wasn't technically a kingdom because he rejected that name. Now, accomplishment of the Crusades would be the turmoil in the Middle East. A lot of this turmoil in the Middle East. We talked about a couple of weeks ago with Charlemagne going into Spain and basically beating the Muslims in Spain so bad they never came back across the mountains. And so that kind of solidified that border between Christian Europe and Muslim Spain. Well, here we kind of have the same thing that is trying to happen. We'll go through the rest of the history of Israel, and especially Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the birthplace of 3 different religions. It's the birthplace of the Jewish religion. It's the birthplace of the Islamic religion. And it's the birthplace of Christianity. Well, if you have the birthplace of 3 different things, all claiming the sites as holy sites, you can see where there's going to be some conflict there. I have 3 daughters, and if you give them one toy to play between, it's not going to end very, very well. People don't like playing nice. People don't like sharing. That's just human nature. But when you add religion and politics to it, it takes on a whole different level. Now, we talk about the 3 different religions, but we know that, especially with Christianity, there's also different aspects of Christianity, isn't there? And so within the church, within Jerusalem itself, we talk about 3 religions. There's also 6 different churches that are responsible for the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Now, this brings up a funny story that I'll bring up here in a little bit. But let's talk about the lasting impact. So while these crusades are going on in the Middle East, Christianity is spreading through the other crusades that I mentioned into the Scandinavian region, but also into the area of Spain and into Great Britain, or what is now known as the United Kingdom. And so it's interesting that this back and forth that is going on in the Middle East is leading to a spreading of Christianity. Now, this is Christianity by means of the sword. Now, whether it's forced conversion, as it was with many of the Vikings in the Middle Ages, or whether it's accepted conversion and true belief, that's up for debate. We got into that discussion before about, is it good to believe in God because you don't want to go to hell, or is it better to believe in God because you want to go to heaven? That's a whole debate that we can get into, but for a later time. And so Christianity was expanding. I have to make reference because the 8 crusades through 200 years, the first crusade, after they won, and they inhabited Jerusalem for about 40 to 50 years. Then after that, the Muslims took over again. And then there was a second crusade, and that lasted even shorter amount of time, and then the Muslims took back over. The crusade that we're most familiar with, that most of us know about, is the Third Crusade. This is where the King of England, Richard the Lionheart, the King of France, and the king of kind of the German area, if you will. This is when they kind of took over. Now, I mentioned art and literature here because, well, we should kind of reference the name Richard the Lionheart. Well, when Richard the Lionheart went off to war, who took over the throne? Well, that was Prince John that took over the throne. And if Prince John took over the throne, there should have been a sheriff of Nottingham who was in charge of Nottingham, and this is where we get the myth, or the story of Robin Hood. Was Robin Hood a real person? He could have been based off of a real person. Was Robin Hood maybe one of these archers that was forced into the Crusades? There's a possibility if you ask Russell Crowe. But this is where we get a lot of art and literature during this third crusade. Also, a lasting impact is the further fracturing of Christianity. Further fracturing of Christianity. What do I mean by that? It is a long distance from Rome, from Europe, into the Middle East. There was no planes at this time. There was no air travel at this time. And so the quickest way to get from one point to the next point is a straight line. But that straight line led through water. Now, if we look at this point, we talked about the disintegration of the Roman Empire, and then also just further disintegration of the Holy Roman Empire. Basically, we've realized that empires don't work, and empires will ultimately always fail. We might be in the midst of something like that happening today. I won't speculate or make any prophecies on that. But here we have the further fracturing of Christianity. The best navy at this time was located in Venice. Venice, Italy, at this time was its own ruling nation, much like any other state within Rome. You hear that term city-states. This is what that means. Rome was its own place. Venice was its own place. Tuscany was its own place. Florence was its own place. They all had their own leaders. It was kind of much like we have our own governors, except they were distinct. Now here in Venice is a really interesting place, and I wish I had the pictures off my old computer for this, because I have a picture of when I was in Venice of this really Roman-looking, straight-lined, marbled window frame. Well, right next to that window frame, in the very next building, was this really beautiful mosaic, curvatured window. Well, it's the mixing of this Roman world and this Middle Eastern world. Venice is this really beautiful mix between all these different cultures coming into this, and we have a tribute because of this navy, because of this importance of the trading post that was Venice. And so during this time, the quickest way is a straight line. The quickest way was through the water. If Venice had the best navy, the easiest way was to commission Venice to take all these crusaders across. Well, something happened, there was some miscommunication, and there was some back talk, and Venice wasn't getting paid what they had originally wanted to get paid. And so instead of taking them straight across to Jerusalem, to Israel, they took them up into the Byzantine Empire, into Constantinople, and Constantinople was sacked by the Crusaders there. Now, Constantinople was the leading force of the Eastern Orthodox Christianity. And so you have these Western Catholic, Roman Catholic Church-fearing people entering into this empire. And I wish I had this picture too, because at San Marcos, the palace in San Marcos, is this beautiful building, but it's got these pillars on the outside of the building, much like you see these marble pillars. Well, the pillars in San Marcos come from the capital in Constantinople. After the sacking of Constantinople, the Venetians took the pillars back to Venice and created their capital. Also, on top of the palace in San Marcos are these 4 bronze statues, these 4 amazing bronze figures of horses, of war horses. Now, these 4 also came from Constantinople, but before being at Constantinople, they were also in Rome. And so there's kind of this beautiful irony here of these 4 bronze statues going from Rome to Constantinople to now sitting at the palace in San Marcos. So really, who has the power during this time? Is it the church? Is it the government? Or is it just these individual countries, these individual city-states, if you will? And so you have not only the divide in the Middle East going on between the Muslims and the Jews and the Christians, but you also have the divide between all Christians. Now I bring that up to get to this. This is what is known as the immovable ladder. The immovable ladder. This is at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. No one knows who put this ladder there. No one knows when this ladder got put there. The closest that anyone can date this ladder to is roughly 1726. So this ladder has been here for nearly over 300 years without moving. Now, why can't we just move a simple ladder? Well, it's because these 6 different denominations all hold control over this church. Each section of the church is dictated by a certain sect of Christianity. In fact, some of us may remember of pictures of a fight between 2 different sects in 2008. One of the sects, staking claim to their section of the church, would put a parishioner on top of the building. And so he would sit there day after day and they'd switch out. But it gets really hot in the Middle East. And in order to avoid some of the heat, he moved his chair roughly 20 centimeters further into the shade. And because of this 20 meters, it caused a fight with bloodshed and with people going to prison because of this fight. And that was in 2008. You'd have think we'd become more civilized than that. But because of this 6 different sects holding over this church, this ladder has not moved in 300 years because no one can agree who put it there, why it's there, and what its purpose even is. And so because they can't come up with a fair agreement of whose it is and why it's there, it simply stays there. A 370-year-old ladder stays there because 6 groups of Christians can't agree on something. What does that tell us about today? When it's not 6 churches in the United States, it's, as I mentioned over and over again, 400 different denominations within the United States alone. 3 churches just within Fredericksburg. When it all started with one man, when it all started with 12 disciples, how did we go from one man, Jesus, to 400 different denominations? It's because of ladders. It's because of ladders. It's because of humanity. It's because of us getting in our own way. And so I've been praying about this, and we're closely approaching the new year. I mean, next week is November. Actually, Tuesday is November. And much like last year when I picked the term shalom as our theme for the year, and I hope you found some shalom this year, some peace within yourself this year. Next year is going to be a little bit different. Next year, the term, I've already come up with it, I've already prayed over it, and unity. Unity. So I feel like a lot of our peace of this last year has been when we've come together. A lot of my peace from this last year has been when all three churches have come together. And so I don't know what that looks like yet. I don't know how it's going to come to fulfillment yet, but I know, at least in our family, we received a lot of grace and a lot of peace. Even when times seem stressful and crazy, and it seems like the world's falling apart around us, we're still able to find peace. And so I'm excited to see what this next year and what unity has to bring, and what God has in store for us. But let's go back. Did I shut it off? I shut it off again. I got something. Playing with that one over. Matthew chapter 10, verse 32 through 35. I told you I took it out of context. Much like many of the Crusaders took this out of context, if we just read this, it sits unwell with us. It's uncomfortable with us. It doesn't sound quite right. I mean, after all, Jesus preached on peace and love, and we get that, hippie Jesus in a tie-dye shirt carrying around a lamb, don't we? But Jesus kind of paints a different picture of himself here. But let's put this back into context. If we look at the very beginning of this passage in verse 10, Jesus just named his disciples. Jesus just pointed out who his disciples will be, and he is giving kind of his first order to the 12 apostles. He is telling them what is going to happen. And so we know who he is talking to, but let's look at the time period of who he is talking to. Many of the people at this time don't know that there is a Messiah in the picture. Many of them will not believe that Jesus is the Messiah. If you are a Jewish person in this time period and you believe in Jesus being the Messiah, you are pretty much casting off everything you've ever been taught, according to your family. And so Jesus is putting it point blank here for his disciples. You will be persecuted. You will be looked down upon. You may be even cast out of your family. But is it worth it to you? This is what Jesus is telling his disciples here. Everyone who acknowledges me here publicly on earth, I will acknowledge before my Father. He's basically telling his disciples, look at me and tell me who you see. Who is standing here before you? Because if you can't call me your Messiah, if you can't call me Lord, I can't bring you into heaven. I can't call you mine because you won't call me your own. Jesus is saying that this will split families. But also know who Jesus is. I came not to bring peace, but a sword. Now, Jesus isn't saying that he's going to bring war to all peoples. He knows that his very presence is going to bring about upset feelings, if you will. Still today, if you mention the name of Jesus, it brings out different emotions in different people. I mean, we've seen it throughout the news. People will spit, fight, claw, punch, bash, run over with vehicles, all because of the mention of Jesus. Now, whether it's for Jesus or against Jesus or whatever the thinking is, I'm not here to debate that. But Jesus brings up a lot of feelings for a lot of different people. And he knows that. He's not hiding behind that fact. He's not playing the hippie, dreadlock Jesus. He's playing the Jesus that flipped over temple tables and chased out money lenders with a whip. It's again father against son, daughter against mother. He knows what the cost is. He knows what will happen. And he wants to make sure that their hearts are in the right place. Now, by saying this next part, if you love your father or mother more than you love me, you are not worthy of being mine. He doesn't say that hate your father. He doesn't say hate your family. He doesn't say despise who they are. He is simply saying that your love for me should be on a different level. Your relationship with me should be on a different level. And I've talked about this before because I know I brought up marriage counseling before, but if you want to grow closer with someone, you must first grow closer with God. In order to know a creation, you must know the Creator. And so if I want to grow closer with my wife, I first have to grow closer to God. Because we could take that verse in 1 Corinthians out of context all day and saying a wife must submit to her husband. But it's a wife must submit to her husband as he submits to the Lord. There's dual submission there. You must be able to give something up in order to show your love. What this morning are we giving up? What are we giving up? What are we willing to give up? Because I can tell you without a fact, I love Krista with everything I am. I love those 3 girls more than anything else in this world. But my faith and my trust and my love for God is more than that. It's so much more than that. And because I love Jesus the way I love Jesus, because I love God the way I love God, I'm able to love them as much as I love them. My love isn't neglected by this verse. My love is magnified by this verse. Because we love as God loves, our love is then magnified. The first commandment that Jesus says is the greatest of all commandments is first love God. First we love the Creator and then love the creation. Love the Creator, then love the creation. Love God, love people. It's as simple as that. But yet, are we still putting up ladders? As we think about that question, I'll have Ann come back up, and we'll go into a time of invitation this morning. What is the ladder that we're putting up in our lives? It's kind of a cliche thing that I didn't think about adding in this morning, but it kind of plays a pretty good picture here. What's separating us from other Christians? What's keeping us from spreading the word of God? What's keeping us from spreading the gospel that we're called to spread in Matthew chapter 28? Are we putting up walls? Are we putting up ladders? Or are we opening up doors? Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for this day. I thank you for being able to gather here to look back through the church history. Because by looking through the church history, we look at our own history. We look at our own humanity. We look at our own shortcomings. We look at our own failures. Whenever mankind tries to take the lead, we fall short. Whenever mankind tries to reach our own salvation, we deny who you are. We deny Jesus' sacrifice for us. Lord, I pray that as we go through this morning, we search our hearts and see where our hearts lie. Lord, I pray that we're not chasing idols, but we're chasing you. That we're not putting up ladders or walls in our lives, but we're putting up passageways. We're putting up doors that allow people to see you through us. Lord, be with us this morning and search us. It's in Jesus' name I pray.